Let me start with a question. Have you ever met someone who seems to exist quietly, almost like a ghost in the digital crowd, present but untouchable? While the world screams for attention, they move through it like a shadow. No updates, no photos, no performance. And still something about them feels more real than everything flashing on your screen. It's strange, isn't it? In a culture built on noise, the ones who speak the least often feel the most alive. What do they know that the rest of us forgot? Maybe silence isn't emptiness. Maybe it's strategy. Maybe it's the power to decide what the world never gets to own. Because every post, every caption, every carefully shaped sentence is a small transaction, trading a piece of your inner life for a moment of attention. The digital age has turned visibility into a currency, and the crowd is always hungry. But here's the paradox: the more you show, the less you see. Noise blinds. Exposure thins the soul. And somewhere in that blindness, the quiet ones learn to observe instead of perform. They notice everything. They read between lines. They understand that what's hidden often reveals more truth than what's displayed. Perhaps they aren't avoiding the world. Perhaps they're protecting what the world no longer knows how to hold: privacy, mystery, and the sacred weight of being unobserved. So before we label silence as withdrawal, maybe we should ask a different question. What if the quiet ones are not missing out? What if they're the only ones still awake? We've built a stage and called it connection, a place where everyone performs and no one truly sees. Scroll long enough and you'll notice the pattern. Every image, every sentence, every smile, it's all choreography. Digital theater disguised as authenticity. We tell ourselves it's harmless. That posting is simply self-expression. But underneath, it's something far more primal. A hunger to belong. A quiet plea for acknowledgement that whispers, "This is who I am. Please see me." The truth is, most people aren't living anymore. They're editing. Editing their faces, their stories, even their emotions, filtering out the parts that don't perform well. Because attention has become the new oxygen, and we've been trained to inhale it until we forget how to breathe alone. Every post is a negotiation with the crowd. Every caption asks for permission to exist, and the terrifying question that hides behind every share is this: if no one reacts, did it even matter? This is the theater of visibility, a place where silence feels like death and noise feels like proof. But deep down we sense the fracture, the gap between who we show and who we are. Psychologists call it incongruence, the distance between the inner self and the projected one. The longer we live online, the wider that gap becomes, until the mask hardens and the actor forgets there was ever a face beneath it. And yet, not everyone plays the role. Some people quietly leave the stage. No announcement, no rebellion, just a soft refusal to keep performing a version of themselves they no longer recognize. They choose the shadows, not because they're hiding, but because they've remembered something vital. Truth doesn't need an audience. That's where the silence begins to change shape. It's no longer absence, it's power. And in that power, something ancient stirs again, the will to live for yourself, not for the applause. There's a kind of power in withholding. In a world addicted to exposure, choosing not to share becomes an act of quiet defiance. Silence, then, isn't weakness, it's authorship, the ability to decide what remains yours when everything else is for sale. Psychologists call it psychological ownership, the deep sense that something belongs only to you, a memory, a feeling, a fleeting moment that refuses to be translated into pixels. Because once you post it, it changes. It stops being yours. It becomes shared property, open to judgment, interpretation, consumption. That's the hidden cost of visibility. Every click is a small surrender, every share a dilution of intimacy. And eventually, you wake up realizing that the world knows your highlights but not your heartbeat. So some people decide to step back. They stop feeding the machine that feeds on them. They guard what's sacred, their mornings, their thoughts, their unfiltered joy. They learn to live moments without the pressure of making them proof. Not everything is meant to be seen, not every beauty survives translation, and not every truth belongs to the crowd. The digital age taught us to believe that openness is always good, that transparency equals trust. But boundaries are not barriers, they are self-respect in motion. They say, "This part of me is not for display." When someone chooses silence, it's not that they've disappeared, it's that they've reclaimed authorship of their own narrative. They're no longer living as content, they're living as consciousness. Because the moment you realize the world can never fully understand what you feel, you stop trying to make it understand. You let your experiences breathe in private air again. And there, behind the curtain, the self grows whole. Every notification is a whisper, a soft pulse of validation, a promise that says, "You exist, you matter." Each like releases dopamine, the brain's reward signal, and somewhere along the way, we stopped sharing to express and started sharing to feel alive. It's subtle at first, a small thrill when someone reacts, a quick drop when they don't. Then, without noticing, you begin living in intervals of feedback, measuring your worth in waves of approval that never last. The architects of social media knew exactly what they were building. Platforms designed not for connection, but for compulsion. Every scroll is a slot machine, every post a gamble for attention. And just like gamblers, we keep playing, not to win, but to avoid the silence that follows losing. Now imagine the ones who stop playing, who walk away from the table entirely, who feel the same pull you do, but choose not to obey it. That's not indifference, that's discipline. It's awareness sharp enough to recognize manipulation and sovereignty strong enough to resist it. Psychologists call this an internal locus of control, the belief that your sense of worth and happiness comes from within, not from reaction. It's rare, it's uncomfortable, and it's the foundation of every truly free mind. Because once you've seen how dopamine disguises itself as connection, you can't unsee it. You begin to crave something deeper, a steadier kind of peace that doesn't depend on applause. And that's where silence becomes sacred. When you no longer need the digital echo of "you're enough to believe it," your nervous system begins to heal. Your focus returns. Your identity, once fractured by reflections, starts to feel solid again. That's the quiet revolution most people miss. It's not about deleting apps. It's about reclaiming the self from the circuitry of validation. It's choosing to live in rhythm with your own pulse again. And once that rhythm steadies, something unexpected happens. You start seeing the world differently, not as a stage, but as a mirror. And what you see staring back is no longer the audience, it's you. Not every silence is born from peace. Some begin as escape, others as surrender. You see, there are two kinds of quiet in this world. One comes from strength, the other from exhaustion. Some people step away from the noise because they've outgrown it. They've tasted what attention feels like and found it hollow. They no longer need the constant reflection to recognize their own face. Their quiet is calm, whole, anchored. But others disappear for different reasons. They've been burned by exposure. They've seen how quickly admiration turns into judgment, how fragile digital belonging can be. Their quiet is tense, a refuge built out of fear. Psychologists call it self-presentational pressure, the exhausting awareness that you're being watched, even when you're not. It's the weight of performing a self that never rests. You start wondering, is what I'm saying being misunderstood? Will this make me look weak? Or worse, invisible? So you retreat, not to hide, but to survive. You long to be seen, but only truly. And that kind of visibility, the authentic kind, feels almost extinct online. For many, the silence begins as self-protection. They stop sharing because sharing hurts. They stop posting because the stage became too loud to hear their own voice. But here's the paradox. Even silence spoken in fear can lead to truth, because once you step back long enough, the noise fades and something unexpected surfaces. Clarity. You begin to see what the noise was hiding all along. That connection built on performance was never connection at all. And from that realization, a new question rises. If silence can wound and silence can heal, then what determines which it becomes? Maybe the answer lies not in whether we speak or stay quiet, but why we do it. Intention turns silence into medicine or into exile. Those who find peace in quiet turn inward to rebuild. Those still trapped in fear wait at the threshold. Both are standing in the same stillness, but only one has learned to breathe inside it. Social media promised us closeness. It offered friendship in numbers, affection in icons, belonging in pixels. And yet, the more connected we became, the more alone we felt. It's a strange paradox. Connection without contact, visibility without presence. You can speak to thousands and still have no one truly listening. You can be surrounded by hearts and still feel unseen. For many, silence becomes the only honest response. Because when you stop posting, something remarkable happens. You start noticing who remembers you without reminders, who reaches out when there's no story to reply to, who still checks in when you disappear from the feed. That's when connection transforms from a transaction into a pulse. It stops being measured in engagement rates and starts breathing in moments again. The unshared ones, the ones that leave no trace except warmth. It's ironic, isn't it? The moment you stop broadcasting yourself is the moment you become truly reachable, because your attention, once scattered across endless screens, returns home. You begin to see people, not profiles. You start hearing laughter that doesn't need witnesses. And slowly reality becomes textured again. True connection was never meant to be consumed. It was meant to be felt. And when you step away from the constant display, you rediscover its weight, the way presence fills a room without needing proof. Some will call you distant, others will wonder what happened, but the truth is, nothing broke, something healed. The quiet ones understand that love, friendship, and meaning don't need to trend. They don't need to be seen to be real. They only need to be lived. That's the paradox of connection. The moment you stop performing it, it finally begins to exist. When was the last time you lived a moment without thinking of how it looked? Without angles, captions, or light? Just you, inside the experience, not outside of it. That's what begins to return when you stop performing your life. Colors deepen, time slows. Conversations linger a little longer before dissolving. Reality stops being something to document and starts being something to feel. At first, it's disorienting. Your mind still reaches for the lens, the frame, the imagined audience. You catch yourself narrating a scene that no longer needs narration. And then, silence. That's when you realize how much of your awareness had been outsourced to performance. Presence, in its pure form, has no witnesses. It doesn't ask to be admired, it asks to be inhabited. It's the moment between breaths, the stillness between sounds, the awareness that exists even when nothing interesting happens. Most people have forgotten what that feels like. They're experts in capturing beauty, but strangers to dwelling in it. When you stop thinking in captions, you start hearing subtler languages, the hum of your own breath, the way light moves across a wall, the emotional texture behind someone's pause. Life becomes richer, not because it changed, but because you finally stopped filtering it. There's an ancient kind of sanity in this return, a clarity that doesn't come from escape, but from attention. Because you're no longer living to show you're alive. You're living to feel it. That's the quiet truth hidden behind every digital disappearance, the rediscovery of presence. And once you've tasted that stillness, you begin to wonder how you ever lived without it. The world mistrusts quiet people. It looks at silence and assumes emptiness, at restraint and assumes coldness. But stillness has its own language, one that doesn't need volume to be heard. We live in a culture that confuses noise with meaning. To be seen is to exist. To be loud is to matter. And so those who step away are misunderstood because their worth can't be measured in metrics. People say, "You've changed." But maybe change is exactly the point. Maybe you were never meant to be available to everyone's gaze. When you no longer perform your identity, you start protecting it, not out of secrecy, but out of reverence. Because once something is public, it becomes fragile. It stops belonging fully to you. This is why the quiet ones seem mysterious. It's not because they're hiding, it's because they're whole. Their silence isn't an absence of story, it's the refusal to let the world rewrite it. They carry an inner richness that algorithms can't decode. Their depth doesn't translate to trends. And yet it's there, in the way they observe without reacting, in how they speak less but mean more, in how they live as if the sacred still matters. To live quietly today is almost subversive. It's saying, my life is not for display, my soul is not for sale. It's the reclamation of something ancient, dignity, But this choice comes with a cost. Silence can make you invisible in a world addicted to attention. It can feel lonely, even punishing. Still, it's the kind of loneliness that strengthens rather than weakens. Because when you stop being constantly mirrored, you finally see your own reflection clearly. Depth isn't glamorous. It doesn't go viral, but it lasts. And those who understand that no longer chase applause, they chase meaning. We've been taught to measure worth by attention, to count eyes instead of meaning, to believe that the unseen has no weight. But the truth is, some of the most defining moments of your life will happen in absolute privacy. No cameras, no witnesses, just you, facing yourself. Growth doesn't post updates, grief doesn't go live, transformation doesn't trend. It happens quietly, deep inside the invisible parts of you. And when you've lived enough of those hidden transformations, you start to understand something sacred. Being unseen isn't the same as being insignificant. It's where your real identity forms, not as a performance but as presence. That's the quiet rebellion against a world that rewards fragments. To stay whole when everything pushes you to divide yourself into consumable pieces. To remember that privacy is not loneliness, it's intimacy with your own soul. Because when you stop broadcasting every thought, you start hearing your own again. You begin to recognize the subtle rhythm of your truth, the pulse that doesn't need validation to exist. And then you see it. The freedom in invisibility, the beauty in being unrehearsed, the peace in belonging only to yourself. The ones who don't post, they haven't vanished. They've simply returned home. To stillness, to wholeness, to life lived instead of displayed. And maybe that's the deepest form of expression, to be fully alive without needing to be seen at all. So, let me ask you again, who are you when no one is watching? When there's no audience to applaud, no mirror to confirm your worth, no lens to capture what only you can feel? Do you still laugh? Do you still notice the way light moves across a wall? Do you still exist without being seen? Maybe that's where truth begins. Not in the performance of the self, but in the quiet certainty that you are enough even when the world forgets to look. In the end, silence is not emptiness. It's the space where your real voice lives. And perhaps the people who never post aren't retreating from life, they're simply returning to it. If this reflection spoke to something within you, stay here, with us. Because this space is for those who see beyond the noise, who seek the unseen, and who remember that what's most real doesn't need to be performed. Subscribe and keep walking this path with us, where silence isn't absence, but awakening.